Hello. Our historical journey through tragedy from ancient Greece to the 20th century continues now as we move from the 17th century neoclassicism of Racine's Phaedra 170 years ahead to the early 19th century and George Büchner's Woyzeck. And we also shift now from France to Germany. Woyzeck is, I think, one of the most interesting and radically innovative plays written in the entire 19th century. It's so far ahead of its time, both in form and in vision, that it really anticipates modernist dramas written a century later. Even more than Shakespeare, Büchner breaks completely from the techniques of classical Greek tragedy that Racine and his contemporaries had imitated, and he also breaks from the theories and the influence of Aristotle that, of course, Racine and the neoclassicists revered. Woyzeck differs not only from Phaedra, but from any other play we've read this semester in several ways. First, this tragedy is written in prose, not verse, like all of the others that we've considered thus far. Second, the play isn't organized by a series of interconnecting acts or unified scenes that logically build on one another, like those that we find in all of the other tragedies that we've thus far studied. Instead, Woyzeck consists of 29 short scenes that are like vignettes or snapshots. This fragmentary structure reflects the broken, alienated state of the social world that Büchner depicts, but also it reflects the fragmentary, chaotic state of Woyzeck's psyche as he plunges deeper and deeper into madness in the play. The connective tissue among these 29 scenes is cut away so that the audience or the reader is often challenged to assemble cause and effect from one scene to the next. Now, although the scenes do move forward in time, the linear development of the plot is full of gaps that we're going to have to try to fill in order to make sense of. And we also are going to have to fill in at times the motivation of the characters, which seems occasionally elusive and elliptical. A third difference between Woyzeck and all of the other tragedies we've read is this. They all featured men and women of high standing and consequence within their social orders. Woyzeck, on the other hand, is the tragedy of a poor, obscure soldier. This is a proletarian tragedy, one that defies Aristotle's claim that tragic heroes have to be figures of nobility, of importance within their communities. Obviously, Woyzeck is not. But, that said, like all of the tragic heroes that we've seen, Woyzeck is oppressed by inner and outer forces beyond his control. He suffers, as all of the other tragic heroes does, acutely, so as to enlist our pity and fear, and like them, he struggles against these forces to the point of insanity. Now, as we'll see, these forces of necessity that oppress Woyzeck include his poverty, his military situation as the lowest of all possible soldiers, and the abuse he suffers in this subaltern role. But these forces also include the cruel scientific experiments in which he is forced to participate in order to earn money for his child. And they also include the infidelity of his mistress, Marie, who is the mother of his child. And finally, the forces of necessity include the uncontrollable rage and jealousy, the instinctual energies within Woyzeck that are as much a part of his psychological makeup as they are Othello's. Indeed, I hope you noticed in reading this play that Büchner is obsessed with Shakespearean tragedy. He alludes in the course of Woyzeck to Hamlet, to King Lear, and to Macbeth, but most of all, he alludes to Othello in dramatizing Woyzeck's jealousy, his uncertainty, his rage, his madness, and of course, like Othello, the murder of the woman that he loves. Now, Büchner really, I think, draws on Othello at almost every point in his portrait of Woyzeck. Both Woyzeck and Othello are, after all, military men, and both are outsiders, though, as military men, they are at opposite ends. Othello is the commander of Venice, while Woyzeck is a lowly orderly. Despite the difference in rank, though, Woyzeck, like Othello, invests such trust in his beloved Marie that the loss of that belief in her destroys his mind and his life, just as Othello's life and mind are destroyed when he loses faith in Desdemona. The two key differences among these tragic figures, Woyzeck and Othello, are these, I think, to bear in mind. First, unlike Desdemona, Woyzeck's mistress Marie really is unfaithful, so his suspicions are well grounded. And second, in Bickner's tragedy, there is no Iago figure to torment and deceive the tragic hero. It's true that the captain, we'll see, seems to act diabolically at times, but the captain is too unstable himself to produce Woyzeck's demise on his own. Now, Bickner doesn't really need in this play a source of evil agitation like Iago to destroy his protagonist, because Woyzeck's daily life is oppressive enough to drive him to despair and insanity and homicide. Now, this is the tragedy of a man who is more socially and psychologically alienated than any figure that we've encountered, except perhaps Hamlet. And like Hamlet, Woyzeck looks out on a world that he cannot understand and struggles to hold on to his sanity and constantly questions, like Hamlet, everything he sees. In fact, part of Woyzeck's tragic suffering is that, like Hamlet, he thinks too much. Despite his poverty and his lowly background, Woyzeck is an extraordinarily intelligent, hyperconscious man trapped in the vortex of his own restless thoughts. Woyzeck wants in particular to know why he suffers, but he also wants to know why he and others were ever created, why society is organized so unequally, and what is the purpose of his or any other existence ultimately. All of these metaphysical questions that are so central to Hamlet are also central to Woyzeck. But above all, Woyzeck, I think, repeatedly struggles to understand why man was created with what he refers to as a dual nature. That is, why are human beings capable of love and lofty ideals on the one hand, but beset on the other with the debased desires and instincts of animals, of beasts? Woyzeck can't answer any of these metaphysical questions on his own, and when he raises them, beginning in the opening scene, his curiosity is met with fear, scorn, and derision. There is no one in this play that serves as a kind of intelligent listener to him, the way Horatio does for Hamlet. Well, before we turn to the play, a few words about the author. Bickner's life was itself tragically short. In his 20s, he entered medical school in Germany to become a doctor and to follow in his father's footsteps. This background helps to explain, this background in medicine, his contempt in Woyzeck for the pseudoscience of the quack who is experimenting on the protagonist. Well, early 19th century Europe at this point was still rippling with the radical political spirit of the French Revolution 40 years earlier. And this charged political atmosphere caused Bickner to change the direction of his studies from science to history and philosophy, and to become involved in a left-wing political circle in Germany. In part, as part of this political activity, he wrote a revolutionary pamphlet in his 20s that was so dangerous that he had to flee to Switzerland or he would have been arrested. And it was there in Switzerland that quite quickly Bickner contracted a fever at the age of 23 and died. But before he died, Bickner wrote 3 remarkable plays in the 1830s, none of which were published or produced during his lifetime. They're all posthumous. Besides Woyzeck, the most notable of these plays is Danton's Death. It's about one of the prime movers in the early stages of the French Revolution that overthrew the monarchy. Now, while Woyzeck certainly assaults the class structure, Woyzeck is less overtly political than Danton's Death was. And really, Woyzeck is less concerned with political oppression specifically than it is with the tragic nature of human existence itself. It's a measure of how influential this short tragedy is that there have been 2 major film versions, one of which I will send you a clip for next class, directed by the great German director Werner Herzog. And there's also been a brilliant opera version by Alban Berg. This is an enormously influential piece of tragedy. All right, well, let's look at the important opening 40 lines of Scene 1 as we find Woyzeck shaving his abusive and unstable commanding officer at the outset. The captain, as he is being shaved, says, "Not so fast, Woyzeck, not so fast. One thing at a time. You're making me dizzy. What am I to do with the 10 extra minutes that you'll finish early today? Just think, Woyzeck, you still have 30 beautiful years to live. 30 years, that makes 360 months and hours, minutes. What do you think you'll do with all that horrible stretch of time? Have you ever thought about it, Woyzeck?" "Yes, sir, Captain. It frightens me when I think about the world, when I think about eternity. Busyness, Woyzeck, busyness, busyness. That's the eternal, that's the eternal, that's the eternal. Can you understand? But then again, it's not eternal. It's only a moment, a mere moment. Woyzeck, it makes me shudder when I think that the earth turns itself about in a single day. What a waste of time. Where will it all end? Woyzeck, I can't even look at a mill wheel anymore without becoming melancholy." "Yes, sir, Captain." "Woyzeck, you always seem so exasperated. A good man isn't like that. A good man with a good conscience, that is. Well, say something, Woyzeck. What's the weather like today?" "Bad, Captain, sir. Bad wind." "Ha, I feel it already. Sounds like a real storm out there. A wind like that has the same effect on me as a mouse." Cunningly, he says, "I like. It must be something out of the north-south." "Yes, sir, Captain." "North-south. Oh, he's a stupid one. Horribly stupid. Woyzeck, you're a good man, but Woyzeck, you have no morality. Morality. That's when you have morals, you understand. It's a good word. You have a child without the blessings of the church, just like the Right Reverend Garrison Chaplain says, without the blessings of the church. It's not my phrase. It's not my phrase." To which Woyzeck now finally responds, "Captain, sir, the good Lord's not going to look at a poor worm just because they said amen over it before they went at it. The Lord said, 'Suffer the little children, come unto me.'" Captain then replies, "What's that you said?" "Well, that's a strange answer. You're confusing me, Woyzeck, confusing me with your answers." All right. Now, note first, before I even begin to discuss the conversation, the image of the razor here. All of this takes place as Woyzeck is shaving his commander. The razor, this blade, becomes a metaphor for Woyzeck himself, when the captain later complains that Woyzeck, quote, "runs through life like a razor." That he means that Woyzeck asks disarming questions and makes disarming statements that cut deeply into prevailing assumptions and that challenge the moral and social order, much to the captain's mental discomfort. But the razor is also literally a sharp blade that one would see if one were tending a performance, one that looks ahead to the blade that Woyzeck purchases and uses so destructively, as we'll see, at the end of the play. The tragedy, then, is bookended by blades that Woyzeck holds in his hand, and that fact gives the entire play itself a kind of tragic inevitability, as if the first blade is somehow inevitably going to lead to the second. Now, here in this passage that I read, Woyzeck's unexpected words, when he finally responds to this prompting, lacerate the mentally unstable captain. The captain is suffering clearly from a kind of existential angst. He says he cannot bear the passage of time. Each moment of life seems a pointless burden. The idea of hours, days, years, months is unendurable. It's, as he describes it, like a mill wheel, and just to look at a mill wheel reminds him of time and deeply depresses him. In short, the captain cannot bear the experience of going on living, but he is also afraid of death, fearful of eternity. Well, he is, this captain, in a severely depressive state, and as we'll see in a later scene, he is even suicidal. So, at this point, he is trying to divert himself, to fill up time, to take his mind off the pointlessness of time by chatting with and mocking Woyzeck cruelty. In a sense, he is displacing his hatred of his own life into disdain for this subordinate, whom he knows cannot in any way defend himself and must do what he is told. Now, the captain in this scene is also trying to stabilize his mind by confirming a few certainties in an otherwise uncertain and confusing world. Specifically, the captain wants to confirm the prevailing social view that Woyzeck is morally inferior and stupid just because he is poor. Thus he calls him stupid and immoral. Thus he mocks Woyzeck's reference to the bad wind when he asked about the weather and says, "You are horrible, what a horrible, stupid individual." Now the captain also knows something else about Woyzeck, other than that he is poor. He knows that Woyzeck's mistress, Marie, is a prostitute, or was a prostitute prior to Woyzeck, and he knows that their child, Christian, was born out of wedlock. Therefore, the captain tells Woyzeck, you can't really possibly be virtuous. Quote, "You have no morality," he tells him. Now, at first, Woyzeck endures this mockery as a subaltern must, almost silently, saying nothing more than, "Yes, captain, no, captain." And the captain interprets this, of course, as the sign of a kind of guilty conscience. Again, trying to convince himself that Woyzeck is fundamentally immoral because he is married to an ex-prostitute and because he is poor. But when Woyzeck does speak under this provocation, the words he speaks subvert all of the captain's assumptions about him and all of the things that the captain had hoped to confirm, beginning with the idea that Woyzeck suggests that God will not look unkindly on Woyzeck's bastard child just because his parents weren't married in a religious ceremony. After all, Woyzeck reminds the captain, it was Jesus who said, "Suffer the little children, come unto me." That is, Christ didn't specify the origin of these little children that he called to them, and he certainly wouldn't turn one away, he implies, if it was born out of wedlock. Now, this unexpected defiance disarms and confuses the captain because a man of Woyzeck's lowly rank and class isn't supposed to quote scripture and challenge moral orthodoxies. Remember, his response is, "You're confusing me with your answers." Well, Woyzeck's subsequent remarks cut even deeper into the assumptions that the captain had hoped to affirm, but now finds completely undermined. Woyzeck says, "It's us poor people, sir, that you see, Captain, sir, money, money. Whoever hasn't got money, well, who's got morals when he's bringing something like me into the world? We're flesh and blood, too. Our kind is miserable only once, in this world and in the next. I think if we ever got to heaven, we'd have to help with the thunder." Captain says, "Woyzeck, you have no virtue. There's not a virtuous human being, flesh and blood." Whenever I think of the window, when it's finished raining and my eyes follow the white stockings along as they hurry down the street. Well, damnation, Woyzeck, I know what love is too. I've made of flesh and blood too. But Woyzeck, virtue. How was I to get rid of the time? How am I to get rid of the time? I always say to myself, well, "You're a virtuous man. You're a good man. To which Woyzeck says, listening to this rambling, "Yes, Captain, yes. Virtue. I haven't got much of that. You see, us common people, we haven't got virtue. That's the way it's got to be. But if I were a gentleman, and if I could have a hat and a watch and a cane, and if I could talk refined, I'd want to be virtuous, all right." Now, Woyzeck rejects conventional religious and social morality by suggesting that what the captain calls virtue is merely a constructed idea invented by those who can afford to be virtuous. If I had a hat and a watch and a cane like a gentleman, I'd want to be virtuous, he says. Note that "want to." It implies that the wealthy who construct this idea of virtuous conduct don't necessarily embody it themselves. The poor, on the other hand, who have very little except the desires of what Woyzeck calls flesh and blood, they don't even have the luxury of thinking about moral virtue. They're made of flesh and blood, and they can't afford morals. But sex is one of the few pleasures that they can afford, in or outside of wedlock. Now, that statement forces the captain to acknowledge his own sexual desires for women he sees out of his window, sometimes when he looks out in the rain, wearing white stockings as he spies them, walking down the street. Yes, he's filled with desire for them, and it causes him to say, "Yes, I'm made of flesh and blood too." And this This reminder of his own desires, his own flesh and blood, challenges the captain's own shallow idea of virtue in a way that he did not want it challenged. Woyzeck, in short, destabilizes the captain's worldview even further by questioning the idea that God is really as loving as Christ's words about the children implied. The very words that Woyzeck had quoted, he then calls into question. Woyzeck, as we'll see, isn't sure about anything in life. When he looks at the world, he sees suffering and injustice, and this causes him to speculate that if there is a heaven and there is a God, that in that heaven, poor men like himself would still have to be servants there. They'd be forced to use a machine to make the thunder. In short, Woyzeck suggests there's probably no justice in this life or after it, if there is an after it. Well, consider the effect of these unexpected remarks on the captain at the end of this opening scene. The captain says, "Yes, you're a good man, but you think too much. It eats at you. You always seem so exasperated. Our discussion has affected me deeply. You can go now. And don't run. Slowly, nice and slowly down the street. Like an open razor, moving slowly." Now, it's clear that despite Woyzeck's poverty, he is a man of questioning intelligence, and he has subverted the captain's assumptions in all sorts of ways, by quoting scripture, by questioning the justice of God, by suggesting that virtue is an invention of those who are comfortable. But this isn't to say that Woyzeck himself isn't a man who is virtuous. Indeed, the captain is right when he says he is a good man, even though he defies conventional social ideas of virtue. He's good to the extent that Woyzeck is compassionate and devoted to Marie and hardworking. But Woyzeck distrusts all abstractions. Words like virtue and morality that the captain throws around as if they had some sort of intrinsic meaning mean nothing to Woyzeck. He distrusts such abstractions, and he distrusts conventional Christian assumptions, too, about a beneficent God. Woyzeck perpetually questions why, if God is indeed a loving creator, as Christianity says, why then must men like himself suffer so in life? And Woyzeck's inability to find an answer to this question of the injustice of suffering is one of many things that are contributing to what soon becomes clear is his incipient madness. As the captain rightly tells him, "You think too much, Woyzeck. It eats at you." It does. But Woyzeck's thought, as we've seen, also eats at the captain in this scene. And far from getting the diversion and reassurance that he sought by mocking Woyzeck during the shave, instead the captain finds that Woyzeck's irreverent words have deepened his existential dread, his confusion about life, and himself. So that by the end of the opening scene, Woyzeck's challenging remarks have so destabilized the already mentally unstable captain that this military superior will soon retaliate by pushing Woyzeck into an abyss of jealousy and even deeper mental chaos. We'll see that in the key scene, Scene 9, when the captain takes revenge on Woyzeck for deepening his own depressive uncertainty about life by depriving Woyzeck of the one thing that he felt sure about, Marie. Okay. Now, when Scene 2 opens, we shift to an open field. And there are clear signs here that Woyzeck's restless questioning and oppression are taking a mental toll as he stands there with his friend Andres. Woyzeck imagines that he hears sounds from underground, which he attributes to the Freemasons. The Freemasons are a mysterious and powerful fraternal organization that developed in the 18th century, made up of upper-class males, from which, of course, Woyzeck would be completely excluded. They were enormously politically powerful in Europe in the 19th century, and indeed, the Masons are still a potent force in European social and political circles today. Well, as he hears this rumbling under the earth and attributes it to this mysterious organization, up above in the sky, Woyzeck hallucinates a fire, which he describes to his friend Andres, as he also describes the sound underground. Can you hear it, Andres? Can you hear it? Something's moving below us. It's moving behind me, under me. Listen, hollow, hollow, down there. It's down there. It must be the Freemasons. And then up above, Andres, how bright it is above. It's all glowing over the town. A fire sailing around the sky and a noise coming down like trumpets. It's coming closer, closer. Let's get out of here. Don't look back. Oh, listen, I can hear the drums and I can see the fire. All right, now, clearly Woyzeck is already lapsing into madness. He is given to paranoia, visual and auditory hallucinations, delusions, and in this scene, an apocalyptic fear that the world is somehow about to end that drives him to run away. Like the captain, Woyzeck feels the burden of living itself is almost intolerable. But like the captain, as we'll see, he also fears death. Now this situation, this sense of life is unbearable and meaningless on the one hand, and yet fearing death on the other. This cultural angst seems to anticipate the 20th century so much that it helped to explain why Beckner's play struck a chord among writers in the early 20th century and why it was then so often produced and has become such a part of the canon. Now, whereas the captain had tried to distract himself from his fear and his depression, Woyzeck, on the other hand, faces the sources of that fear and depression, and like Hamlet, he wants to penetrate to the heart of those terrible things. This is why he tells Marie in scene 3 he wants to investigate what he has seen and what he has heard. He said, Marie, there was a terrible noise in the sky and everything was on fire. I'm on the trail of something big, Marie. It followed me all the way to town, something that I can't put my hands on or understand, something that drives me mad. Look around you. Everything's hard and fixed, so gloomy. What's moving back there? Oh, Marie, when God goes, everything goes. I've got to get back. Now, note here that in his mental misery, in his psychic agony, Woyzeck wants to find a cause for everything, particular for human suffering. He feels that somehow he could answer the riddle of human suffering if only he could penetrate the mysterious sounds that he hears underground and the mysterious fire that he sees in the sky. These are signs. What do they mean? Now, as I've noted, there are specific material causes for Woyzeck's suffering and mental imbalance. And these causes, these forces, operate in conjunction with his hypersensitive questioning nature. The more he suffers, the more he thinks, the more he thinks, the more he suffers. Specifically, the forces of oppression that weigh upon him and push him more and more to this agonized kind of thinking are, first, his poverty, second, his military oppression at the bottom of the entire hierarchy, third, the social injustice that surrounds him, in which he is mocked for his lowliness, all of which drive him in the direction of madness and exacerbate his religious doubts. Thus, at the end of that statement to Marie, he says, when God goes, everything goes. Woyzeck would like to believe in a loving New Testament God, the God embodied by Christ, who said, let the little children come unto me. Indeed, that desire to believe in such a God is reflected in the fact that he has named his bastard son Christian. But more often, Woyzeck suggests that if God exists and created the world as we find it, then that God must be cruel and capricious. This God is a fearful, punishing deity that Woyzeck associates, it seems, with that fire in the sky. But increasingly, Woyzeck finds it difficult to believe in God or in a higher power at all. He'd prefer to believe in a loving God. He's more likely to believe in a cruel God, but more and more it seems as if God has simply vanished from his perspective. Indeed, God seems entirely to have vanished in a scene that follows. When Woyzeck is at a carnival, watching a monkey in a sideshow act. The monkey performs like a man, and Woyzeck, watching it, revels in the grotesqueness of this impersonation and in the grotesqueness of creation at large as he is standing in a group watching this. The carnival barker, the charlatan, says, look, walks upright, wears coats and pants, and even carries a saber. This monkey here's a regular soldier. So what if it isn't much different? So what if he's still on the bottom rung of the human ladder? Here, take a bow. Monkey bows. Seeing this and listening to Woyzeck recall a dog sitting on top of a hat, the gentleman standing next to him says, oh, grotesque, how really grotesque, by which he seems to suggest both the monkey and Woyzeck himself, who is, after all, at the bottom rung of the social ladder. Woyzeck responds, don't you believe in God either? It's an honest fact. I don't believe in God. You call that grotesque? I like what's grotesque. See that? That grotesque enough for you? Pointing to the monkey. Now, note here that in his bitterness at the world he sees around him, Woyzeck sometimes revels in the grotesqueness of creation, feeling that he is a part of it. It is a kind of bitter reveling in what he sees as meaningless and disgusting. He knows that while a monkey that carries a saber merely impersonates a man, man, on the other hand, including himself, man really does have a bestial instinct. Man really does have an animal nature, a nature that human beings can't control and often descend to. There's nothing of the human in the animal. On the other hand, there is plenty of the animal in mankind. Creation, in short, is grotesque. Creation is a botched affair for Woyzeck. But at this point, there is something even more urgent for Woyzeck than trying to determine God's existence in order to make sense of this botched affair. What is even more important to him than finding that answer is Marie's love and fidelity, and believing in those things. Woyzeck needs to continue to believe in her love, despite Marie's prior life as a prostitute, and despite his understanding, as we've just seen, of the instinctual drives of flesh and blood that are the animal within us. Sadly, as we realize in scene 3, Woyzeck's belief in Marie's fidelity and love is misplaced. Marie cannot control her erotic attraction to the drum major, this figure far above Woyzeck in the military hierarchy, who struts with his phallic sword and his phallic plume. She can no more control her erotic desire for the drum major than Phaedra could resist Hippolytus. But in Marie's case, it's not because the drum major is sexually cold to her. No, far from it. The drum major presents himself to her the way a male animal would to attract a mate, with a kind of finery and plumage and display. And Marie responds with an animal lust that she can't disguise when she looks at him from her friend Margaret, who is there with her as she watches the drum major. Margaret says, look at that, what a man, built like a tree. Marie says, yes, he walks like a lion. The drum major salutes her. Margaret says, oh, what a look he threw you, neighbor. We're not used to such things from you. Marie then sighs, soldiers, oh, you pretty lads. But Margaret notes, ha ha, Marie, your eyes are still shining. Well, Marie says, I'm a respectable person. Margaret says, I'm a respectable person, but you, Marie, everyone knows that you could stare your way through 7 layers of leather pants. You could, because of course you are known for your lustiness. Now, note that to be flesh and blood, as Woyzeck told the captain, is to be prey to animal desires. Even when Marie tries to be faithful to Woyzeck, who supports her and their child, she finds that she can't. And she suffers guilt as a result of her failure to control her animal desires. This is the terrible bind of being human in the play. We are capable of guilt on the one hand because we violate our ideals, and yet we can't control that violation. Now, Marie and the drum major exchange glances, and that leads him to give her earrings. When she receives them, she cannot resist the earrings, either as a sexual lure, which guarantees that they will have an affair, nor can she resist the narcissistic pleasure that, as a poor woman, these rich, glowing earrings provide for her. Thus, as we find her in scene 6, she is sitting with her child in her lap, looking at herself in a broken piece of mirror, and recalling that the drum major had told Woyzeck to get the hell out of there because he wanted to talk to Marie. Despite that insult, she still accepted the drum major's earrings, and now she wears them as she looks into herself into the mirror. They must be gold. I wonder how they'll look on me at the dance. Our kind's got only a little corner in the world and a piece of broken mirror. I'm just a common piece. I'm just a common piece. What could anyone expect of me? How could I resist these earrings? A moment later, you'll note, Marie is forced to lie when Woyzeck enters and sees that she is wearing the earrings. What's that? He asks. Nothing, she says. Oh, there's something shiny in your hands, Marie. An earring. I found it. I'll never have luck like that. And 2 at a time? Am I human or not? Marie asks. I'm sorry, Marie. Look at the boy asleep. Lift his arm. Look, and the chair's hurting him. Look at his shiny drops on his forehead. Everything under the sun works. We even sweat in our sleep, us poor people. Here's some money again, Marie. Take it. Pays for everything. Okay, now, note that unknowingly, Marie accepts this money, and a moment later, after Woyzeck has gone off, castigates herself. She says, after a pause, I am bad, I am. I could run myself through with a knife. Oh, what a life, what a life. We'll all end up in hell anyway in the end, man and woman and child. Now, unknowingly here, Marie is anticipating her own death. It will come with a knife, though not by her own hand, though we'll see, by Woyzeck's, when he becomes certain of her sexual betrayal. She is lacerating herself with guilt here, both for accepting the earrings and the inevitable affair, and also for lying to Woyzeck. Her sense of hopelessness and powerlessness in the face of her sinful desires mirrors those same feelings in Woyzeck himself. Marie consigns herself to hell for her sexual sin, a sin that she knows she is about to commit and knows she won't be able to resist committing because of the animal desires in herself, which she hates but can do nothing about. Now, in this scene, part of Woyzeck knows that Marie has received these earrings as a gift from the drum major who had told him to get lost. He points out that no one, after all, finds 2 earrings at one time, and yet you have 2, one in your hand and presumably one in your ears. But the prospect of Marie's betrayal at this moment for Woyzeck is so unbearable that, like Othello, he tries here to suppress his suspicions. But as with Othello, he has a memory, and the memory of these earrings lingers in his mind. Now, the piece of broken glass in which Marie had been admiring herself with these earrings when he walked in, that piece of broken glass is an apt image of the world of this play, a world that seems broken, but also a metaphor, if you will, for the fractured state of Woyzeck's own mind, and also for the fragmentary structure of the play itself. This play in which we find such a cleft between the rich and the poor. Now, rather than warning Marie of his suspicions when he sees her with the earrings, as we've seen, he tries to suppress them. But in doing so, he directs Marie's attention to a different shiny object. He takes his eyes off the earrings in order not to think about them, and points to his child in her lap, who is sleeping, the child that the 2 of them created. Christian is lying there with his arm against the chair, perspiring, even as he sleeps. Part of the world's injustice, Woyzeck sees, is that there will never be any rest for the poor. Even in their sleep, they seem to be laboring and suffering. And he reminds Marie that as a poor man, His life is a constant labor on their behalf and their child's. Here, take the money. This, he suggests, is all that he can give her, what he can earn through his own misery. Now, in the carnival scene that had preceded this one, Büchner posed a question that haunts Woyzeck and is related to his thoughts about the cause of human suffering and to his doubts about God's existence. The question is this, and Woyzeck comes back to it again and again in the play. What distinguishes human beings from animals? Well, perhaps the primary distinction that emerges is that humans, unlike animals, suffer guilt for acting on their instinctual desires. We'll see. Now, in scene 5 that I just referred to, the ringmaster exhibited not just the monkey, but also a horse that this charlatan claims can count, and he says is therefore both animal and human, what he calls a metamorphosed being. He says, now, bringing forth the horse, show your talent. Show your talent. You think with a double reason. Think with that now. Turning to the audience, the charlatan says, this is no dumb animal. This is a person, a human being, but still an animal too, a beast. The nag conducts itself indecently. That's right. Put society to shame. Yeah. Woyzeck is watching this. Now, the charlatan is, of course, inventing things. He's manifestly full of shit here, as carnival barkers tend to be. He's lying when he says that this is a human being or that there is a human component to the horse. No, the trained horse is merely seeming to mimic human intelligence when it counts. It really isn't thinking with what he calls double reason. No, there's no reasoning process in the horse at all. But on the other hand, man really does have what Woyzeck calls a double nature, and what the carnival barker refers to here. Man has a double nature because he possesses bestial qualities of the horse. While this is going on, we're told the horse does something indecent, quite possibly showing an erection or something, showing that it is animal and not clearly human. At the same time that this erection is going on, though, the drum major is in a state of erection, of extreme sexual excitation as he is watching Marie, mimicking the horse in this respect, watching the same show as Woyzeck and Marie. He sees her, the drum major does, and he declares, "What a piece!" And thus begins his brief and inevitable conquest of Marie, who responds to his advances from the start, even as she first tries to avoid his touch. This man who she looked at and found so alluring just on first sight feels the same way on first seeing her. It's a mating dance between them that anticipates Darwin's idea 20 years later that sexual attraction in any species is rooted not just in the individual's sexual desire for pleasure, but in a kind of species desire for reproductive advantage. In short, in order to perpetuate the species, individuals seek out what they take to be appropriate mates. The drum major in this play, written 40 years before Darwin published The Origin of Species, the drum major speaks not just as an individual, but almost as a kind of member of a species. He doesn't just want to have sex with Marie. He declares to her that he wants to impregnate her and breed the way animals desire to breed with one another. When they meet in scene 8, Marie says, "Go on, show me how you march. Show me more of this mating dance. Broad chest as a bull and a beard like a lion's. There's not another man in the world like that, and there's not a prouder woman than me, just to watch you." To which the drum major says, "Wait till Sunday when I wear my helmet with the plume and my white gloves. Damn, that'll be a sight for you." But then he goes toward her to touch her, and as she goes toward him, the drum major says, "You're not such a bad piece yourself. Hell, we'll plot a whole brood of drum majors, right?" And he puts his arm around her. Annoyed, she says, "Let go." "Bitch," he says, "you don't touch me." To which the drum major says, knowing better, "Ah, really? There's devils in your eyes." Marie concludes, "Let there be for all I care. What's the difference?" When Marie says, when he says there's devils in your eyes, and she says, what's the difference? She's essentially confirming, yes, there are devils in my eyes. I am filled with desire for you. And she is essentially in that statement surrendering to the desire, as if it weren't clear already that she has been overwhelmed by the drum major's gaudy male plumage and his promise that he will wear even more plumage in this mating dance. Meanwhile, Woyzeck is suffering from yet another form of degradation in his efforts to support his family. For some weeks, we learn, he has been submitting to the experiments of a quack doctor who is no more legitimate than is the carnival barker. Well, what is the experiment and what's it designed to prove? Well, in scene 7, the doctor reveals it. He's angry because as he looks out the window, he sees Woyzeck piss in the street as a consequence of the effects of a diet of peas that he has been restricted to for 3 months. When Woyzeck arrives, the doctor says, "I saw it all, Woyzeck. You pissed in the street. You were pissing on the wall like a dog, and here I'm giving you 3 groschen a day plus board." When nature, Woyzeck says, "But doctor, it was the call of nature." The doctor says, When nature, what has nature to do with it? Did I or did I not prove to you that the muscularis constrictor vesica is controlled by your will? Nature, Woyzeck? Man is free. In mankind alone we see glorified the individual will to freedom. Yes. Now, presumably, the experiment was meant to demonstrate that despite the increased instinctual need to urinate that a diet of peas produces, despite that, man's free will should enable him to resist the animal urge to urinate in the street, to hold it until he finds a chamber pot. Woyzeck had signed a contract saying that he would hold his urine, thereby demonstrating that he possessed free will. But Woyzeck has now broken the contract by pissing in the street against a wall. Later, Woyzeck again enrages this quack when he has been exhibited sort of before a group of students the way the carny barker exhibited the monkey. He's told to wiggle his ears by the doctor, and Woyzeck is unable to wiggle them on demand. That command, wiggle your ears, was meant to demonstrate that by an act of free will, a human subject could activate even non-functioning muscles. Well, Woyzeck not only fails in these absurd attempts to demonstrate free will, but Woyzeck also distresses the doctor by explaining why he failed and why man can't control his bodily drives and his animal instincts. When the doctor says, "Woyzeck, you really shouldn't have pissed on the wall," Woyzeck says, "You see, doctor, sir, sometimes a person's got a certain kind of character, like when he's made a certain way. But with nature, it's not the same, you see. With nature," he snaps his fingers, "it's like that. How should I explain it? It's like," "Woyzeck, you're philosophizing again," to which Woyzeck says confidingly, "Doctor, sir, did you ever see anything with a double nature? Like when the sun stops at noon and it's like the world was going up in fire? That's when I hear a terrible voice saying things to me." Now, Woyzeck explains that the force of nature is too strong in man. Our animal desires overpower our reason, overpower social custom, overpower moral ideals. Man really does have a double nature. Unlike the horse, which is merely an animal simulating human activity, human beings have ideals and we reason, but the beast in us, Woyzeck suggests, will always prevail over those higher aspects of our double-natured being. As for free will, well, Woyzeck makes it clear that because of our animal nature, he has almost none at all. He is a victim of multiple forms of determinism. Social determinism, economic determinism, and as he makes clear here, biological determinism. The only thing free in Woyzeck are his thoughts, but those thoughts are driving him deeper and deeper into madness because they are thoughts that don't provide answers. Indeed, in the passage I just read, this despairing thought about man's lack of agency brings Woyzeck back to his apocalyptic memories of the fire in the sky that he hallucinated and his thoughts about the end of everything. Here, as in the opening scene with the captain, Woyzeck again is subverting with his words and behavior another man's shallow certainties. But in doing so, he is enraging another individual who exercises power over him. This individual will give him money only insofar as Woyzeck will cooperate. Unlike the captain, however, who when Woyzeck leaves in scene 1 is filled with existential confusion, this quack responds by convincing himself that Woyzeck is a classifiable medical type, that he is classifiably insane due to, quote, an idea fixed of a secondary order. Thus, he takes consolation in the illusion that somehow he has assigned a cause and a taxonomy to Woyzeck. Thereby, he can disregard whatever Woyzeck has told him. Now, 2 scenes later, the quack reappears in the street, talking to the captain. And when Woyzeck passes by, something unfortunate happens. As if Woyzeck's life were not sufficiently oppressive at this point, and as if his mind were not unstable enough, the captain now precipitates a complete breakdown by insinuating that the drum major is having sex with Marie. Now, remember the opening scene of the play, because it reveals the motivation for the captain's cruelty here in scene 9. It is an act of revenge. The captain knows that Woyzeck loves Marie. She's all that he has. And so he poisons Woyzeck's already troubled mind, as Woyzeck had roiled the captain's unstable mind in the first scene. In fact, the captain is so desperate now that he tells the doctor before Woyzeck arrives that although he fears death, he's haunted by the very thought of suicide and by the fear of his own desire for it. Doctor, he says, I'm so melancholy, I have such fantasies, I start to cry every time I see my coat hanging on the wall. To which the doctor says, bloated, fat, thick neck, apoplectic constitution, trying in some way to pigeonhole him medically the way he did with Woyzeck. Well, the captain blames Woyzeck, in part, for this terror of life and fear of death. And he alludes to Woyzeck's lacerating effect on him through his words while he was being shaved a moment later when Woyzeck passes by. And the captain says, "Oh, Woyzeck, hey, where are you off to in such a hurry? Stay a while, Woyzeck. You're always running through the world like an open razor. You're liable to cut someone." Well, he has cut the captain psychically while he was also cutting his beard. We realize the captain is angry about this. Now, what follows is the captain's payback. Like Othello with Desdemona, Woyzeck's faith in his lover is the foundation of his life, insofar as it has a foundation at all. The captain knows this, and the captain has also heard rumors of the drum major's conquest of Marie, because after all, the two of them have done very little to hide that affair. Now, the captain mocks and tortures Woyzeck under the guise of trying to enlighten him and calling him calling him again mockingly a good man. Consider what he says. The captain says, on the subject of long beards, what was it I wanted to say, Woyzeck? What was it I was thinking about beards? Yes, this thing about beards. Tell me, Woyzeck, have you found any long hairs from beards in your soup bowl lately? I don't think he understands. A hair from a human face, from the beard of an engineer, a sergeant, or a drum major? Well, Woyzeck, have you? Woyzeck's response to this is immediate. It is a panic, rage, jealousy, horror. The captain says, well, maybe not in his soup, that hair is, but I'll bet if you hurry home around the corner, I'll bet you might still find one of a certain pair of lips. A pair of lips, Woyzeck. Hey, I know what love is too, Woyzeck. Look at him, doctor, he's white as chalk. Woyzeck says, Captain, Sir, I'm just a poor devil, and there's nothing else I've got in the world but her. Captain, sir, if you're just making a fool of me. Me? Making a fool of you, Woyzeck? Doctor says, your pulse, Woyzeck, your pulse. It's skipping, it's irregular. Woyzeck, Captain, sir, Captain, the earth's hot as coals in hell, but I'm cold as ice now. Hell is cold. I'll bet you I don't believe it. God, I don't believe it. Captain says, well, look here, you would, how would you like a pair of bullets in your skull? You keep stabbing me with those eyes of yours, Woyzeck, and I'm only trying to help you, because you're a good man, Woyzeck, you're a good man, yeah. To which Woyzeck says, I'm going now. Anything's possible. The bitch, anything's possible. The weather's nice, Captain, sir. Look, a beautiful, hard gray sky. You'd almost like to pound a nail up there and hang yourself on it. And only because of that little dash between yes and yes again and no. Captain, sir, yes and no. Did no make yes or yes make no? I must go and think about that. Now, ask yourself, why does Woyzeck fall into a jealous rage here so quickly in the face of this accusation, even more quickly than Othello does under Iago's influence? It's because he has suppressed his awareness of Marie's infidelity. He has suppressed the memory of the earrings, but has been unable to forget them clearly. In this response to the captain, Woyzeck vacillates between pleading with him not to make a fool of him and feeling such a aggression, such a desire and rage to attack the captain, which he cannot do, that his eyes, the captain says, seem to stab him like daggers, as if they convey just in the gaze the aggression and the rage that toward the captain that Woyzeck would like to act out. Now, up until now, everything except Marie that Woyzeck has wanted to believe in has proven either illusory or unknowable, including God. But he knows that our animal nature is powerful, and he knows where it leads. And he also knows, after all, and remembers that Marie was a prostitute before she became his lover, and he remembers that she was wearing earrings that she could not possibly have simply found. Well, the jealousy that Woyzeck feels here with the awareness of these things I've just described, the jealousy he fears isn't the only torture that besets him here. He is also tortured, like Othello, by his inability to live in a state of intolerable doubt. It's the combination of jealousy and uncertainty which deepen his agony and which deepen the burden of his constant speculative thought, which he can't escape or control, that keeps churning and churning in his brain. What he speaks of as the gap between yes and no is that gap between his faith and doubt in Marie. Yes is faith, no is the certainty that she is guilty. The problem is that there's a gap between yes and no. And that gap between yes and no, between believing in her and being certain that she is unfaithful, that doubt drives him into more deeply tortured introspection and drives him into a state of uncertainty that he can no more bear than Othello can bear. He goes off with the words, I must think about it. Well, of course, that's the problem. Thinking itself is a source of torture for him. Like Othello, and like Theseus, for that matter in Phaedra, in his jealous impatience, Woyzeck cannot bear to think, however, for very long, because it is agonizing to dwell upon the possibility of one's lover's infidelity. You'll note something, that all three of these jealous characters want evidence in order to confirm their suspicions and allay the unbearable state of uncertainty and thought. But they're unable or incapable of waiting for actual evidence, the way Hamlet, for example, is capable of waiting to find evidence to confirm Claudius's guilt. Well, Woyzeck resembles Hamlet, then, in his questioning and his tortured subjectivity, but he lacks Hamlet's patience, and in this respect is much more like Othello. Now, although he is, after this conversation with the captain, still not certain about Marie's guilt, he strongly suspects it. And the thought that she may well be guilty fills Woyzeck with a kind of suicidal despair. He says he would like to hang himself from the sky. But Woyzeck isn't just revealing a suicidal impulse in himself here, born of his doubts about Marie when he says that. He's also at the same time retaliating against the captain with that remark. Woyzeck knows the captain is a depressive, and with this image of pounding a nail and hanging it in the gray sky, he invites the captain, tempts the captain to hang himself, this man who couldn't even bear to look at a coat on a hanger because it suggested suicide to him. And note also, in talking about the weather here, he sarcastically refers back to that opening conversation and echoes it when the captain, in order to mock him, had asked him about the weather. Now he's telling him about the weather in a way that he knows can only prey upon this suicidal captain's desire to die and fear of it. Now, in the next scene, Büchner again draws on Othello as Woyzeck tries to find a visible sign of Marie's infidelity, her sin, as he gazes at her. He says to her, "Whore, it should show on you. Why can't I see it? Take it in my fists. A sin so big and swollen. Marie, you're beautiful as sin. How can mortal sin be so beautiful?" We recall Othello palpating Desdemona's hand and looking for signs, frustrated that it doesn't show on her skin. Now, even though Woyzeck can't find any visible evidence that he's seeking, he nonetheless insults Marie by reminding her that she was a prostitute, a streetwalker, before they became lovers. He says, "It's a nice street for walking, isn't it?" Well, just as Othello strikes Desdemona in the street in his jealous rage, so too Woyzeck's jealous rage here is so intense that he goes after Marie physically. Consider her response to him when he does. She says, after he goes after her, "Don't you touch me, Franz. I'd rather have a knife in my body than your hands touch me." To which Woyzeck says, "Whore, no, it should show on you. Something should show. Man is a chasm. It makes me dizzy. It should show." Now, note that Marie here echoes her earlier guilty remark about punishing herself with the knife when she received the earrings. Again now, she speaks of it in a different context when she said she'd rather have a knife in her body than Woyzeck's hands on her. That's the second invocation of her body being penetrated by a knife. And you'll note that there is again then in this language a sense of inevitability, that she will die a violent death, cut by a knife, that seems to grow out of this. But it grows out of it in another and more specific way, because her words here inadvertently plant the image of a knife penetrating her body in Woyzeck's mind through the power of suggestion. Now, Marie has at this point been sexually penetrated by another man, by the drum major. And the response that will develop to this in Woyzeck's jealous consciousness is that he must penetrate Marie's body with a knife as a form of punishment for her betrayal. From this crucial moment in which she speaks of the knife in her body, or rather having it than him touch her, from this moment on, Woyzeck's thoughts, like Othello's, become increasingly bloody. A scene later, Woyzeck asks, "Why are all things red that I look at now?" As if they were, quote, roiling in a sea of blood. Woyzeck's language, like Othello's, also now becomes filled with references to animals and depraved sexuality. We see this especially as he sits outside a dance hall in a drunken state, positioned so that he can look in and torment himself by watching Marie dancing closely inside with her new lover, confirming now his worst fears. And as he sits outside, he says, Don't stop, beating his hands together. Turn and roll and turn. God, blow out the sun and let them roll in each other in their lechery. Man and woman and man and beast, they'll do it in the light and in the sun. They'll do it in the palm of your hand like flies. Whore, who's red as coals. Don't stop. He jumps up. Watch how the bastard takes hold of her, touching her body. He's holding her now, holding her the way I held her once, and he slumps down. A moment later, he asks Andres, "What time is it?" 10, Andres says. "Is that all?" Woyzeck replies. "Is that all it is? I think it should go faster. I want to think about it before night. I think it should go faster." Now, you'll note here that the phrase that he uses, "I think time should go faster," certainly, again, recalls Othello as a meditation on the nature of subjective time. Like Othello, Woyzeck is in a rack of jealousy and uncertainty, so that now just jealousy, he's certain of it now, but in a rack of jealousy, so that each second seems drawn out intolerably. He can't believe that it's just only 10 o'clock. We recall the captain's words here at the beginning of the play about the burden of living through time in the opening scene, in which hours and days and weeks seem to pass so unbearably slowly. How can you endure the passage of time when it is so agonizing, but at the same time when you fear death? Well, now, like the captain, Woyzeck would again like to end everything, even though he is still afraid. He'd like to end his life, but above all, he would like to end the agony of his own mental existence. So that toward the end of the scene, Woyzeck says, "It feels good here like this. Even better if I'd laid myself down. Yes, it would be even better if I could die." Andres says, "Woyzeck, there's blood on your head." To which Woyzeck replies, "In my head, maybe. If they all knew what time it was, they'd strip themselves naked and put on a silk shirt and let the carpenter make their bed of wood shavings. Ah, the world is out of order. Why did the street lamp cleaner forget to wipe my eyes? Everything's dark. Devil damn you, God, I lay in my own way. Jump over myself. Where is my shadow gone?" The phrase, "the blood is not on my head," as Andres says of him, but "in my head," carries a double meaning. Woyzeck feels that he is mentally wounded, as if stabbed in the brain by his certain knowledge now of Marie's betrayal. He sees it confirmed as they dance. But the second implication of blood in my head is that his thoughts are now filled with images of blood shed, images of knives arising out of the depths. He echoes Hamlet's famous line, "The time is out of joint," when he says the world is out of order. That is, life is absurd, and that if people knew it was this absurd, if they knew what time was, which is essentially absolutely meaningless continuum, they would do nothing but prepare themselves for death, to get ready for their own coffin, in order to escape this absurdity that we call life. Hamlet feels that he must set what is out of joint right. Woyzeck has no such hope. But like Hamlet, he feels trapped completely within himself. And in the passage I just read, he refers to it this way: "I lay in my own way." He can't get out of himself. He's so wrapped up in himself that he asks, "Where's my shadow?" It's as if he's absorbed his own shadow. He doesn't even cast his shadow anymore. So completely insular, so completely alone is he. And again, like Hamlet, Woyzeck's mind is confused and dark, so much so that he says that the lamp cleaner, forgot to wipe my eyes. I live in a meaningless world in which I can understand nothing. Well, it was only a matter of time until Woyzeck would consciously formulate the idea of using the knife that Marie mentioned and planted in his psyche. Because, after all, it has, in a sense, been gathering this image, this word knife, in his subconscious ever since Marie mentioned it. And the idea of stabbing her grows out of this. Because now Woyzeck begins to hallucinate a shiny knife that recalls the shiny earrings that he saw her holding and wearing. He says now, seeing this knife in this hallucination, "What's that lying over there?" shining like that. How it sparkles. I've got to have it. With this, it's clear that Marie's fate is now sealed, though she doesn't know it. When Woyzeck goes to an open field, it becomes even clearer, because having seen the hallucination of the shining knife, he now says, "Don't stop, don't stop. What are you saying? What are you saying?" He hears voices underground. Louder, louder. Stab? Stab? Was that it? Stab the goat bitch dead? Stab her? The goat bitch dead? Should I? Must I? Did I hear it there too? Does the wind say so too? Won't it ever stop? Stop, stab her, dead. Okay, well, note that unable to accept responsibility for his murderous desire as arising within himself, Woyzeck, in this auditory hallucination, displaces that murderous voice onto something outside. He doesn't want to acknowledge that it is arising from within him, so it becomes projected onto a voice that is telling him to do it. He also struggles against this voice, against this desire to kill Marie. He asks, must I? Must I? Yet, clearly, he intends to. When his friend Andres reports Marie's affair, Woyzeck speaks of Marie in the past tense. He says, she was, as if she's already dead. So inevitable and uncontrollable does his drive to kill her seem. But this drive to murder Marie becomes a fully conscious intention, fully conscious, and a plan only when Woyzeck goes to a Jewish pawnbroker and buys a knife like the one that he has been hallucinating. Indeed, he recognizes what he's been hallucinating in the store, suggesting that probably the hallucination derived from having seen this knife at some time in the past. Woyzeck tells himself of the knife, "This'll cut more than bread." Like Othello, Woyzeck will soon enter his victim's room and announce his intentions. When he sees Marie, he says, "It's getting time," he tells her. Now that phrase has two interesting implications. The first is, when he says it's getting time, he means, I think, I cannot bear the passage of pointless, agonizingly slow time any longer. But it's getting time also, I think, clearly means it's now getting to be your time, Marie, to die. But even as we find Woyzeck now hallucinating blood and hearing underground voices telling him to stab Marie, there are nonetheless moments when his mind clears, moments when he thinks and speaks with a kind of penetrating lucidity. And one of these comes in scene 16, shortly before the killing. As Woyzeck is sitting in a tavern drinking, he cynically dismantles the idea of courage. Woyzeck says, quote, "The man with courage is a dirty dog." Now, just as he had subverted the concept of virtue earlier as an invention of the wealthy, now he suggests that what we call courage is nothing more than animal aggression that we give a fancy name to. Well, hearing him say this to himself angers a nearby sergeant. But instead of arguing with this man, Woyzeck says instead that he would like to befriend him. And in doing so, Woyzeck unmistakably, I think, channels Hamlet again by asking the central question that perplexes Shakespeare's tragic hero and has throughout the play haunted Woyzeck. The question is, what is man? What does it mean to be human? Woyzeck has said that man is double-natured, rational on the one hand, bestial on the others. But sometimes he wonders if we're capable of rising above our aggression and our animal lust that are rooted in our physical makeup. And this is one of those moments when he wonders if it might be possible. As he sits in this tavern, he makes one final attempt to believe in something. It's not God, it's not romantic love, and it's not justice. He's lost faith in all of those. But he would like to believe in an enlightened aspect of human nature, which is essentially brotherhood. If only he could affirm brotherhood, he might be able then to find some value and dignity in human experience. And thus, he turns to this this fellow soldier who has taken offense at what he said about courage. And to the sergeant, he says, "What is this?" looking at his own arm. Woyzeck's arm, flesh, bones, and veins. What is this? Dung. Why is it rooted in dung? Must I cut off my arm? No. Man is selfish. He beats and shoots and stabs his own kind. Woyzeck sobs. But we must be friends. I wish our noses were two bottles that we could pour down each other's throats. What a beautiful place then the world is. Friend, my friend, the world. Woyzeck is moved, but then he looks up. Look, the sun coming through the clouds. It's like God emptying his bedpan on the world. And Woyzeck cries again. Now, you'll note that Bickner deliberately echoes here the lines in which Hamlet ponders what a piece of work is man. In apprehension, Hamlet says man is like a god, and yet in his corporeality, man is merely a quintessence of dust. This problem of man's double nature has tormented Woyzeck. Our flesh and blood, he tells the sergeant, is violent and aggressive and lustful. Okay, that animal part of us, our flesh and blood, makes us want to kill and to mistreat our own kind. Okay, as Woyzeck has himself been beaten and humiliated quite recently by the drum major. In our physical nature, Woyzeck suggests we're no better than dust, or we're even worse. In his formulation, we're no better than dung. We're no better than shit insofar as we are dominated by our animal flesh and blood. And that idea makes him weep. But then he has another idea. He says, what if we could be friends? It is, of course, just a fantasy. But he offers a vision of brotherhood. He imagines the two men drinking one another. He's moved by that idea, but then he looks up at the sky. No. He sees the sun coming through the clouds. Those clouds, you remember, where he had earlier wanted to pound a nail and hang himself? And that sunlight coming through the clouds is a reminder of God, the source of light, the source of creation, and the idea that God made man as he is. Well, even though Woyzeck has been doubting God's existence, he now suggests, if there really is a God, far from creating us in his own image, what God did in creating the world and man was merely discharge his bedpan. He made the world with his shit. If God exists, we are merely the contents, if you will, of the divine bedpan. Man is a flawed creation because our reason and our capacity for brotherhood and our moral ideals are too weak to control our sinful desires. And no one knows this better than Marie. She hates herself for her sin, and we see her trying again to suppress her desires as she lacerates herself for her betrayals. She would like to pray, like to atone for her affair. She would try to think of herself as Mary Magdalene, the reformed prostitute in Scripture, who you recall anointed Christ's feet. But the problem is that Marie knows that she can't change her nature, even though she sits there with the Bible in her lap, trying very hard to believe that she can be redeemed. Striking her hands together, she says, Lord God, I can't. Lord God, give me only so much strength that I may pray. The child presses himself closer to her. The child is a sword in my heart, because he is the child of the man she has betrayed. And she says, what am I? I've strutted in the light of the sun like a whore, I am. It's my sin, I'm a whore. I've stood at his feet weeping. And then she thinks of Mary Magdalene as she reads this passage from Scripture, from the Bible in her lap. And stood at his feet weeping, and began to wash his feet with tears, and wiped them with the hairs of her head, and anointed them with ointment, striking her breast, everything dead, Savior, Savior, if only I might anoint your feet. If only I could believe that I could be redeemed for my sinfulness like Mary Magdalene. But of course, she knows she can't. And in the same spirit of attempted but futile resistance to animal desire, Woyzeck decides to bury his knife, the knife in which he plans to kill Marie. He tries to bury it in the ground, this knife that he has purchased. And he recites to himself in doing so the fifth commandment, thou shalt not kill. But this too, of course, is futile. Like Marie, his resistance against this drive fails. and he soon digs the knife up again. The play repeatedly suggests that we can never live up to our moral ideals. They're just illusions that collapse in the face of our instinctive drives to sex and to violence. Now, the tragedy then in this play, given that determinism, is as it is in Phaedra. The tragedy lies in our doomed struggle against what can never be overcome. Now, Beckner reinforces the play's rather nihilistic vision of human experience in a terrible fairy tale that a grandmother tells little children, a story that can only pervert the young minds who hear it, but which certainly reflects Woyzeck's own vision of the world. The grandmother says, "Are you right, little crab apples? Here's a story. Once upon a time, there was a poor little girl who had no father and no mother. Everyone was dead, and there was no one left on the whole wide world. Everyone was dead. And the little girl went out and looked for someone day and night. And because there was no one left on earth, she wanted to go to heaven. And the moon looked down so friendly at her. And she finally got to the moon, and it was a piece of rotten wood. And so she then went to the sun, and it was a faded sunflower. And when she got to the stars, they were little golden flies stuck up there as if they were caught in a spider's web. And when she wanted to go back to earth, the earth was an upside-down pot, and she was all alone. And she sat down there and cried, and she sits there to this day, all alone." A moment later, Woyzeck says, "Marie, it's time. It's getting time." Now, the moral of that fairy tale is that all hope for beauty or happiness or love in life is a delusion. Justice, brotherhood, love, and possibly God are illusions, just as the sun and the moon and the stars aren't what they appear to be in the fairy tale when you examine them closely. The only truths are that life is rotten at the core, like the moon, and that each individual is ultimately alone, as Woyzeck is alone in extremis. Now, it's not just Marie and children who are listening to this. Present also at this recitation of the fairy tale is the village idiot. And he had also been present when Woyzeck was sitting outside the tavern suffering. This village idiot is the embodiment, the living physical embodiment of another Shakespearean echo, and specifically a nihilistic one, this time from Macbeth. He is meant, I think, to recall one of the play's most famous lines that reflects this play's despairing tone. At the end of Macbeth, facing certain death, Macbeth describes life this way. It is, he says, a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. The idiot in this play is the embodiment of that idea. And that pretty much sums up the vision of life that Bickner gives us in Woyzeck. Well, I'll devote the first 20 minutes of our Zoom on Friday to finishing this play. We'll consider the murder scene and what follows thereafter, and then we'll turn our attention to Act 1 of Strindberg's The Father.